Are the Atlanta Falcons or any other NFL team on the verge of trading for Justin Fields? I don't think so.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Sirius Black, aka Mr. Drew, aka the Jolly Green Giant, aka Mr. AKA. And of course, I've been covering the Falcons for too long, almost 2 decades now. Formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I want to give a shout out to the everydayers out there that tune in each and every day and make this podcast their first listen or their first watch. And if you want to become an everydayer, all you got to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today's episode, we will discuss Jonnu Smith getting cut and why I think replacing him as a backup tight end is a need. And we'll get into what did exactly Raheem Morris mean by talking about finding a quarterback that's the quote unquote best fit for our city. But we'll start things off talking about the sort of the increased buzz over the last day or so that the Falcons are about on the verge of trading for Justin Fields, right? And I think a lot of this is a lot of people reading into Raheem Morris's comments about the right fit for the city. And again, we'll circle back to that later. I also think a lot of this comes from people seeing a clip of Justin Fields' manager posting on IG of Justin Fields celebrating and someone saying you're going home and people reading into that quite a bit. And, we live in a day and age where, you are presented with information on a daily basis that is often taken out of context, 12-second clips of this and a soundbite of that and all that. And so you, as an individual human in living in the world of 2024, in the year of our Lord, Thomas More said 2024, have to do a lot more work to find the necessary context for things. And as a habit, as a practice, I try not to take 12-second clips and take them out of context. I don't know what Justin Fields is celebrating. I don't know what you're going home means. I don't know any of that stuff. And, I've seen various people say that, there's been a retraction or whatever, but I didn't do the research to figure it out because, I'm not one of these people that's, doing the social media investigation on who's following who on IG or whatnot. But I know a lot of people have been paying attention to that with Justin Fields. But what I'm going to say is I do not think a Justin Fields trade is imminent for the Falcons or really anybody in the NFL. And I say this knowing that this time of year, things can kind of age poorly. I think back to 2 years ago where I did a podcast with Josh Kendall of The Athletic talking about how the Falcons were probably going to be very quiet that offseason, and no more than 45 minutes after that podcast ended, it was announced that the Falcons were trading for or the Falcons were pursuing Deshaun Watson. And completely scrapped that entire episode of a podcast and had to do a new one. So I say that knowing that in the coming hours, days, weeks, or months, many things that I will say on this podcast, especially during this time of year, because of the 24-hour news cycle that is free agency, and with moves that are made at 6 a.m. and made at 11 at night, and all in between. That there'll be times where these podcasts and some of the statements I say age poorly, but so I'm offering that caveat. But it goes back to a conversation we had a couple of weeks ago with Lauren Cox of Locked On Bears about Justin Fields, and sort of I hinted at that I don't think there's going to be this robust trade market for Justin Fields, and therefore I don't think a trade for Justin Fields is going to be something that's going to happen very early in this offseason. I think it's going to wait. Again, the timing of it, it'll happen at some point, probably. Again, we'll see if Peter King's walk-off grand slam is predicting the Bears keeping Justin Fields. It'd be a hell of a That'll be a hell of a call, Peter King, to walk off in the sunset, calling that one, basically scooping the shock of the century at this point in time if the Bears do that. But we'll see on that. But I look at it. There's like 9 teams to me that probably don't know who their week 1 starter at quarterback is going to be. It's Atlanta, Chicago, Denver, Las Vegas, Minnesota, New England, Pittsburgh, Tampa Bay, and Washington. And once you start playing the musical chairs game in the process of elimination, the pool of candidates that are going to be trading for Justin Fields seems to dry up, right? And I know The Athletic recently ran an article last week that basically listed 5 teams: Atlanta, Denver, Las Vegas, New England, Pittsburgh, as the most likely trade candidates. And they talked to all 5 beat writers that covered those 5 teams, and all of them were kind of like, maybe they'll be interested in Justin Fields. And that's kind of fueling it, where I don't know if Fields is going to be at the top of anybody's wish list, right? We've heard from various folks, Jeff Schultz, Steve Weish, Josh Kendall, that don't think the Falcons are going to be all in on Justin Fields, as some people think. We've seen reports from Pittsburgh that say that the Steelers won't be all in because they still believe in Kenny Pickett. It's been crickets in Denver. I haven't seen a single thing coming out of Denver that suggests that they're in on Justin Fields. The Raiders, are they going to be in now that they hired Luke Getsy and he was the OC in Chicago and that marriage didn't really work great? And so they're going to be like, we're going to run it back and it's going to be different this time in Las Vegas? Doubtful. And so it's just like, okay, if it's not Atlanta, if it's not Pittsburgh, then maybe it's New England, maybe again, but they have to go through the entire draft process to figure out if they want to take a quarterback at 3, right? And that's the thing, that takes time. Like, contrary to popular opinion, teams haven't figured out exactly who they're going to draft on February 28th or February 29th when you guys are listening to this, right? Like, that's something that they don't really figure out until April. Now, they may be leaning a certain way. They've graded out these players, but especially at the quarterback position, you got to meet with all these guys. You got to put these guys, on the whiteboard, and you got to bring them to your facility, and you're not going through that entire process until, April, right? And then you will know. And so, like, if New England, basically the point is New England's going to take some time. And so, to me, I've said this before to other folks, I feel like Justin Fields is this year's Baker Mayfield, and referring to kind of how Baker was the last guy standing 2 years ago with Carolina, and wasn't necessarily the last guy standing last year with Tampa Bay. But, like, he's going to be a lot of teams, alternative option, their backup plan. And that's part of the reason why I've listed him as sort of plan D for the Atlanta Falcons. Because I think the team that ultimately does pull the trigger on Justin Fields is going to be the team that's going to look around the landscape and be kind of left out the altar at the quarterback position and be like, well, I guess Justin Fields is now our best option because we've exhausted these other options. And that, to me, is why, like, I don't think we're going to see this offseason kick off with the Justin Fields trade. I know the Bears are wanting that, but, like, they don't really control that, right? It takes 2 to tango. Now, but for that reason, that's why, like, I'm not here to sit here and close the door completely on Justin Fields being a Falcon, because I do think there are certain steps, there's a certain path that we may be going down over the next couple of weeks, right? That may lead to the Falcons being that team that say, you know what, Justin Fields is our best option. And the scenario I sort of foresee it outlined, you've heard me talk about plan A, plan B, plan C, and plan D, just like Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris have been talking about the last couple of days, right? Every dayers of the podcast. But if you need to get caught up, for me, plan A is the Falcons wanting to trade up to get one of the top 3 quarterbacks. But we may get to a situation where none of those 3 teams seem that open to trading, or they're going to slow play it. Plan B is the Falcons go after Kirk Cousins. And again, that could be thrown out if Kirk Cousins decides to re-sign with Minnesota or signs elsewhere, which is possible, right? I don't think it's as likely as some people think it is, but it's certainly possible, right? And then plan C, to me, is the Falcons, sort of sticking at 8 and taking JJ McCarthy. But the scenario where they circle back to Justin Fields, to me, is a scenario where maybe they don't love JJ McCarthy to the degree that a lot of people think they could or should or will or whatever, right? They just like, we don't see a whole lot of difference between JJ McCarthy and whoever QB, if JJ's QB4, then whoever QB6, QB7 is. It's fair. And so in that situation, Justin Fields as plan D, to me, starts to make a whole lot more sense. But for that reason, I think you have to get through certain steps in order to get to that point for the Falcons. And I think that's probably true of other teams. And so that's why I don't sit here and think like, oh, we're going to get a Justin Fields trade, announced before the league year starts on March 13th, right? I mean, maybe we get one March 10th or March 11th or something like that. It's possible. I'm not going to say here, but I do think this is going to be a thing that may linger into the latter part of March and possibly the early part of April. I think it's possible that like Justin Fields is still on the Chicago Bears come draft night, and it's only on at the end of that night or the next day or that Saturday that we find out that Justin Fields is being traded. So basically, in summary, like I think Justin Fields might be plan D for the Falcons. I think he's going to be plan B and plan C for a lot of other teams. And so therefore, I think people need to pump the brakes on, when they think Justin Fields, a trade is going to happen, because I sit here and I go like, you take the manager post, like, I don't know when that post was made, right? I think I first became aware of it Tuesday night around like 8 or 9 o'clock, but I'm sitting here on Wednesday at 5 p.m. and nothing has come of it. And this Justin Fields story is a big storyline. What the Bears do at the quarterback situation is one of the biggest stories of the offseason. You think Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport and all these guys are going to be sitting on this? Oh, like someone's going to scoop them by 18 hours? Like maybe someone might scoop them by 18 seconds on a Justin Fields trade, right? I don't even know if they'll get 18 minutes on a Justin Fields trade. So I sit here and I go like, if it's not coming from one of the big NFL insiders, like I don't think you need to be scouring Twitter and seeing random people tweet about a Justin Fields trade happening and being like, oh, is this a thing? Like just basically check the main NFL, the Josina Andersons, the Jonathan Jones, et cetera, all those people's feeds. And if they haven't tweeted about a Justin Fields trade or something that's imminent or a team is talking to them, it ain't happening, guys. I'm sorry. Like it's weird to me that people just think that some random person on the internet is going to scoop the biggest story of the league. I don't, it's so weird to me that people think that, but it is what it is. So we will move on and talk about Raheem Morris's comments about finding the best fit for the city, the right guy for the city, and what exactly that means. I don't think it means what people think it is. I think it's Raheem Morris being a little bit of a showman, bringing a little bit of that Hollywood mentality here to Atlanta. We'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp, and a lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. I know if I had more time, I'd be grinding more film on some of these prospects, but how would you use your extra time? A better way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so that you can do more of it. Therapy has benefited me, and BetterHelp has benefited me by teaching me coping skills like you can only control what you can control. I can't control who the Falcons trade for, draft, or sign as a quarterback. I can't control if they win, but I can cope with it in the best way possible. And if you're looking for those coping skills, right, if you're thinking of starting therapy, highly recommend BetterHelp. Give it a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. And all you got to do is fill out a brief questionnaire and you'll get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So continuing today's episode, I want to plug the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel right here on YouTube, the first of its kind, covering all the national sports and shows, local experts, all that and more here on YouTube. And check out the Locked On Sports Atlanta 24/7 streaming channel as well. Now, talking about Raheem Morris saying, we got to find the best fit for our city. And a lot of people read into that. He said that to Jonathan Jones of CBS Sports, one of those insiders that's probably going to be, if he's not first, second, or third, but he'll be there within 7 seconds of the Fields trade breaking, is what I'll say. But he said that, and you saw Jonathan Jones perk up, and Raheem was like, Raheem knows what he's doing. And I've listened to a lot of Raheem interviews in the last 24 hours, the ones at AtlantaFalcons.com, the overall pressers at the Combine, the CBS Sports one, Rich Eisen show he did. So, Raheem's a little bit of a showman. And this will be something I'll potentially run by, Tanitra or Jarvis of Locked On Sports Atlanta next time I get the chance to talk to them, because they know Raheem personally. I don't, but they've covered Raheem quite a bit, and I'd be curious what their thoughts on this. But I feel like some of the being in LA for the last 3 years has rubbed off on Raheem. We know he's already very comfortable holding court in front of cameras and microphones, much more so than say an Arthur Smith was in that. But I think when he does that, I think Raheem I'm talking about. I think some of the things he's going to say some things that are kind of designed to get attention because he's been kind of used to that attention that he's got in LA, right? And trying to get some more of that attention on Atlanta. I don't think Raheem is going to shy away from being the center of attention in the same ways that I think Arthur Smith and company were, right? Like we know Terry ain't saying nothing, right? The fact that we've gotten Terry this offseason to admit that the Falcons are actually interested in a quarterback is a huge step forward for Terry Fontenot, because basically Terry just says the same things like, oh, we're open to this, we can do this, we can do that, we'll explore all our options or whatever, but like he'll never let it slip what he thinks of what the team is going to do. And the fact that they've been very open about the quarterback position is very telling. But I think Raheem's comments are he knew what he was doing when he said that to Jonathan Jones, because Jonathan Jones, as I said, perked up, and Raheem was like, you can read into that whatever you want. And I think that's the difference between Raheem, right? As for the statement itself, like I don't think there's much to read into it, right? Again, I think a lot of it is just kind of, it reflects whatever your own biases are, and Raheem kind of clarified a little bit by talking a little bit about sort of, the connection between this organization and the community. And that's something, given how philanthropic, Arthur Blank is, that's something that's going to matter. But like, I think, when some people hear what's the best fit for our city, again, that's what I'm talking about with the biases, where it's like, whatever you think that means, you're going to take it and run. Right. And I would just say, like, I would probably pump the brakes. Like, I wouldn't read too much into it because it could mean anything. Right. Like at first glance, you probably wouldn't have thought Matt Ryan was the best fit for our city back in 2008. In a lot of ways. And I'm sure there are probably still people to this day that still think that he wasn't a great fit for the city, but it seemed to work out pretty well is what I'll say. So, I think that's something to keep in mind when it comes to that. So, I think Raheem is saying stuff that he knows is going to, be a little bit of a lightning rod that's going to get the Jonathan Joneses and the people of the world perked up. But I still don't think he's going to be like, oh, I'm going to be divulging state secrets is what I want to get at. So that is kind of my read on that situation. So we'll see how that goes. I think the best fit for our city is just like, we just need to find a guy that can be the face of this franchise is basically what it means, and obviously you want to have someone that will fit into the culture of Atlanta, but I don't think the culture of Atlanta is a one size fits all sort of thing. I think that's one of the beautiful things about the city of Atlanta. It is a very sort of diverse city that brings people from different cultures and different backgrounds together. Maybe not to the degree that, say, a New York City does, but like, I think Atlanta, that's what I'll say. So we'll leave that conversation aside and talk about the thing that I know you guys are dying to talk about, which is, my favorite subject, which is backup tight ends, right? I love my third string tight ends. And today we're going to wrap up by talking about second string tight ends, because the Falcons just cut Jonnu Smith, and that move makes sense. But I think that opens up a hole for the Falcons to fill, and we'll break that down as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Now, football season is over, which means basketball season is going strong. And that means you can get buckets with your bet at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on your favorite NBA, NCAA teams and players. Quick bets, their same game parlays, exclusive player props, NFL draft props, NFL season props, NHL, whatever you want. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to shoot your shot. FanDuel is an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons, let's talk about Jonnu Smith, who was cut on Tuesday. Had a $9 million cap hit heading into 2024. The Falcons saved about $6.5 million by cutting him. And it's not a surprise that the Falcons moved on from Jonnu Smith. I would say after Heinicke and after Mike Hughes, he's probably the most likely player to get cut. And it didn't make a ton of sense for the Falcons to be paying that type of money to a tight end too, especially one that isn't necessarily an inline blocker. And I think that's really what's next for the Falcons at tight end. I'm expecting the Falcons to invest something into replacing Jonnu and finding sort of that inline blocking tight end that will be a complement to Kyle Pitts, right? I don't think that's going to be John Fitzpatrick. Again, John Fitzpatrick at least has theoretically the skill set, but I doubt the team is going to roll with John Fitzpatrick as the front runner to be the tight end two coming off of 18 career snaps this past season. Now, I think a lot of people, I've heard from folks that assume that the Falcons are going to basically marginalize the tight end out, or at least marginalize the 12 personnel groupings that Arthur Smith leaned so heavily on this past year with Jonnu Smith and Kyle Pitts, right? And 12 personnel refers to the two tight end sets, right? And it's understandable why people would come to that conclusion, because you many of you may know that the Rams are the team that have used 12 personnel the least over the last 3 years combined. And the assumption would be with Zach Robinson that they're going to borrow from that, right? Recency bias. But what a lot of people don't realize is if you go back beyond the last 3 years, the Rams leaned heavily on their 12 personnel. In 2020, they actually led the NFL in two tight end sets, right? And in 2019, they were top 11 in two tight end set usage. And the main reason for that was they had two pretty good tight ends in Gerald Everett and Tyler Higbee. And when we talk about, okay, how does Kyle Pitts fit in the Zach Robinson offense, assuming that, he's borrowing heavily from Sean McVay, the style of player that Kyle Pitts is not a Tyler Higbee. He's more of a Gerald Everett. And so that to me tells me that the Falcons need to get their Higbee type, right? Which is more of that inline guy, and not necessarily a guy that's a starter like Higbee has been. But you need that guy because of all the run game stuff that the Falcons presumably are going to do. And again, this goes back to the Parker Hesse agenda. Oh yeah, Parker Hesse's days in Atlanta may be done, but his days on this podcast are not done. I'm sure there will be several moments over the next few weeks and months that his name will be invoked on this podcast. But we talked about it all throughout the season, that when you're going to run an outside zone run scheme like the Falcons did under Arthur Smith and probably will continue to do under Zach Robinson, you need to have capable blocking tight ends to make that scheme work, right? It's not everything, but it's a significant part of it, right? And I know there's what happens if Zach Robinson isn't running an outside zone scheme? Well, I say that's possible, but it doesn't seem likely, because why did the Falcons retain Dwayne Ledford if they're going to completely change their blocking scheme? And what Dwayne Ledford is well known for is implementing a high-level outside zone run blocking scheme, right? We talked about this with the retention of Dwayne Ledford, the offensive line coach, and Michael Petrie, the running backs coach, where it was essentially Raheem Morris saying, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, in reference to the Falcons run game. So, the Rams leaned up until this past year were very much an outside zone run scheme. And I don't expect that to be any different under Zach Robinson here in Atlanta. So I think you're going to need to find that inline tight end that can do that function in the run game. And I don't think that's Kyle Pitts. Right? I know there's been some comments from the new coaching staff that like they believe in Kyle Pitts being a true tight end. Sure. That's, I expect, Pitts to spend more time in line under Zach Robinson than he probably did under Arthur Smith. Like I want to say, I probably should have double checked the numbers before I jumped on this podcast, but I want to say like Gerald Everett spent about 40% of his passing snaps as an inline tight end. Higbee was consistently like above 70% early in his career. That's changed in the last couple of years at 50%. And that's a really high number, I should say, relative to most starting tight ends in the league, because you compare that to, say, George Kittle, who's probably the classic Y tight end, inline tight end in today's NFL. He spends about less than 60% of his snaps in line. And I want to say like Kyle Pitts, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. There's been individual games where it's been like 40, 50%, but for the most part over the course of the last couple of seasons, my recollection, it's like 15, 20, 25% maybe. And so that was something that we didn't see. And so I think that number is going to go up, but Kyle Pitts is not the guy that you want blocking on the edge as, in an outside zone run scheme. And so finding that guy, right? And so in this way, that's why like I sit here and I go like, it's going to probably look more like the 2019, 2020 Rams, because Kyle Pitts is going to be the Gerald Everett and hopefully produce more than Gerald Everett did. And we got to find our Tyler Higbee that can sort of be the sort of 1-2 punch with Kyle Pitts because of the run game stuff. Now I think that could come in free agency. I think that can come in the draft, right? Either option is more, right? There's always typically capable inline blocking tight ends available in free agency, right? Those guys typically become the journeyman in the NFL throughout the years. And from what I understand, I haven't studied the draft. I have some impressions from the Senior Bowl, and those guys seem to be like, yeah, if you're looking for someone who can put their hand in the dirt and block, okay, you can find capable guys in this draft. But if you're looking for pass catchers, I don't know if the Senior Bowl had too many of those guys. But from what I've heard from other people talking about this tight end class, like it does seem like it's a relatively deep class that you can find some quality Y/inline tight ends in rounds 3, round 4, round 5, round 6, or whatever. So it makes sense that the Falcons could wait until the middle rounds and get that guy. I know we had Corey Woodruff on the podcast last week talking about Kirk Cousins, and he mentioned how he thought Gerald Everett was a strong bet to be the Falcons free agent pickup. I don't necessarily agree with Corey. I get why Corey makes that connection. You got the Rams connection. You got the Kevin Koger connection, or Koger, whatever his name is, who is the new Falcons tight ends coach, who was with the Chargers the last 3 years, and that included Gerald Everett the last 2 years. So it makes sense when you connect those dots, but I think there's just too much overlap between Gerald Everett's skill set and Kyle Pitts' skill set. And so they don't really complement each other. And you need to find that more complementary sort of, I can put my hand in dirt and run block and all those various things that I think the Falcons. So I think that's going to be something that the Falcons are going to value this offseason. Obviously it's not, the biggest priority. As I said, like it's probably something that they can get a cheap free agent. It's something that they can, wait on in the draft, but we'll see how that all plays out. So, Jonnu, last things I'll say, you will be missed. You were a yak king. And he was a guy that really fit this Arthur Smith offense. That's something that we talked about since Arthur Smith got hired, is that this offense is about having dudes. And what I mean by that is like the players that tend to shine in Arthur Smith's offense are the players that he can just get the ball to you and you can go create, right? It's just like, I'm going to get the ball in your hands and you're going to turn a 5-yard check down into a 15-yard gain. Those are the guys that tend to thrive. That's what part of the reason why Cordero Patterson was so successful early on in the Arthur Smith tenure. And Jonnu, to me, kind of took on that mantle with CP sort of getting, marginalized in the offense this year. And Jonnu basically became more of that guy that, a lot of dump offs, consistently making the first guy miss. Probably the highlight of his season was that 60-yard touchdown he had against the Vikings on the screen pass against cover 0. So I enjoyed Jonnu Smith a lot this season. I know he was very polarizing to a certain community of football fans that, may be less invested with what we call reality football versus fantasy football. But, I definitely enjoyed Jonnu's time here in Atlanta. It was unfortunate. It always seemed like it was probably going to be, a year if especially with, his status being attached to Arthur Smith. So we'll see if he rejoins Arthur Smith in Pittsburgh, or, Mike Tomlin can convince, Arthur Smith that Connor Hayward can kind of fill those shoes in the Jonnu Smith role. So we'll see how that all plays out there for them. But wish Jonnu the best. Not a whole lot of positives that you can say about the Falcons offense this year, but I do think like watching Jonnu like turning these like 2-yard screens into like 12-yard gains was one of the few positives that we could definitely say that was consistent and reliable about this offense this past year. So I definitely have a soft spot in my heart for Jonnu Smith. And he was fun. So there you guys have it. We'll be back with more combine coverage tomorrow on the podcast. We'll see if I hit stop on this recording and pick up my phone and realize that Justin Fields trade has happened in the last 30 minutes. So we'll see how that goes. But continue to make us your first listen. Check out Locked On Sports today, Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On NFL. You want to get the latest on Justin Fields trade rumors, I'm sure Locked On Bears has you covered as well. If you want to get, the future of Jonnu Smith, go check out Locked On Steelers or whatever. So it's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every